The Bugatti Chiron was worth $3 million, and it would not start. 20 engineers, the best in the country, flown in from 3 cities, had spent 4 hours kneeling beside it. None of them found the answer. The CEO stood 40 feet away, watching, her champagne glass empty and her patience thinner than she let on. Then a man in a gray work shirt walked through the service door holding a 5-year-old girl's hand. The head of engineering recognized him immediately, and the look on his face told everyone in the room everything they needed to know. What he did in the next 5 minutes would change everything. Stay with this one, it earns it. The Bugatti Chiron sat in the center of the Grand Pavilion, like a $3 million paperweight. Its paint, a deep agave blue with silver undertones, caught the chandelier light from every angle, the kind of color that seemed to shift depending on where you stood. 400 guests moved around it in a wide, careful circle, the way people orbit things that are both beautiful and broken. The engine was dead, had been dead for 4 hours, and in 30 minutes, the most important contract of Eleanor Vance's professional life was supposed to be signed beside it. Eleanor stood near the far end of the display floor, a champagne flute in her right hand empty. Had been empty for the last hour, and her back straight in the way that cost her enormous effort to maintain. She wore a structured black dress, the kind designed to communicate authority before a single word left her mouth. Beside her stood Werner Baumann, 67, silver-haired, the senior representative of a German engineering consortium that had been her father's partner for 22 years. Werner was looking at his watch. Not obviously, just enough. The Vance Apex Gala was the company's largest event of the year. The contracts signed here moved markets. The deals announced in this room made headlines. And tonight, the centerpiece of the evening, the vehicle around which the entire $47 million partnership was being built, would not start. Dominic Reese appeared at Eleanor's left shoulder. He was 44, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal vest and a silver tie that he had clearly chosen to match the car. He carried his phone in one hand and the expression of a man who had been managing other people's crises for so long that crisis management had become indistinguishable from his actual personality. "We have another specialist coming in from Midtown," he said. "This will be handled." Eleanor looked at the car. "You said that 2 hours ago." "I meant it then and I mean it now." She did not respond. She looked at the Chiron. She looked at the 12 men kneeling around it in various configurations of professional frustration, and she counted. The first engineer to arrive had come from the authorized Bugatti dealership on the Upper East Side. A man with 11 years of experience servicing the brand, impeccable credentials, and a diagnostic kit worth more than most people's cars. He had spent 40 minutes under the hood, risen slowly, wiped his hands with the methodical care of someone buying time, and said that the error code appearing on the onboard display did not correspond to any firmware version in his documentation. The second was a W16 specialist, flown in from Chicago, the engine that powered the Chiron. 16 cylinders arranged in a W configuration, a mechanical achievement so complex that fewer than 400 people in the world were certified to service it. He attempted a full ECU reset. Nothing changed. Engineers 3 through 7 arrived in succession over the following 90 minutes, each carrying a different theory. A secondary fuel pump, a pressure sensor reading a false value, a starter relay stuck in partial engagement, a drive module reporting a communication fault that wasn't there. Each theory was tested. Each theory failed. The car remained silent. By the time the 8th engineer arrived, the guests had stopped pretending not to watch. Conversations near the display floor had slowed. Eyes kept drifting back to the cluster of men crouched around the vehicle, then away again, then back. The sound of polite dinner conversation had taken on the particular quality of people discussing things they don't care about while watching something they very much do. The 12th engineer, a lean man from a specialty European auto firm in New Jersey, spent 22 minutes on his back beneath the chassis before standing up and making no comment whatsoever. He simply walked toward the edge of the display floor and began making a phone call. Dominic, who had been circling the Chiron for the better part of 3 hours, would approach the vehicle periodically, lean in close, look at something specific, then step back. He never touched anything. He never suggested a new avenue of investigation. He simply circled, looked, and stepped away. Grace Aldrin, seated at a small workstation near the rear of the display floor with a diagnostic tablet across her knees, had been watching this pattern for some time. Grace was 28, recent in her role, and had been hired directly from graduate school by Eleanor's operations team. She had a very specific quality. She noticed things before she understood them. The 18th engineer was German. A man, Werner Baumann, had personally summoned with a single text message. He arrived with the quiet confidence of someone who had never failed to solve a mechanical problem. He spent 31 minutes with the car. Then he straightened, looked at Werner, and gave a slow, single shake of his head. Werner looked at his watch again. Dominic said, "We have 2 more teams on the way. We have time." Eleanor said nothing. She was counting. By the time the 20th technician stepped back from the vehicle with the same hollow expression as every man before him, 4 hours had passed. The room had given up the pretense of normalcy. The display floor had become something closer to a wake. Guests refilled their glasses and watched from a respectful distance, back to life. Grace sat with her tablet and her running tally, a list of every theory proposed, every component tested, every approach attempted and abandoned. The list was long. At the bottom of it was a single category no one had touched. She hadn't said anything. She was new. She wasn't sure. She was still thinking about that when the door on the service side of the hall opened and a man in a gray work shirt walked in. He was not tall enough to command a room. He was not dressed in a way that caused anyone to turn. He had the kind of face that was easy to look at and easy to look past, strong-featured but unremarkable, wearing the expression of someone focused on something they haven't reached yet. He carried a small canvas bag over one shoulder, and with his free hand, he held the hand of a 5-year-old girl with a crooked ponytail and light-up sneakers. The girl was holding a miniature toy car. It was blue, the same blue as the Chiron. His name was Levi Harmon. He was 29 years old. He had been hired 6 weeks ago as a contract mechanic for the logistics team responsible for transporting and performing pre-event mechanical checks on the 3 display vehicles. His work had been finished before the gala started. He had stayed because the finance office owed him a signature on his payment confirmation, and the person responsible for that signature had not responded to his messages. He was not supposed to be here. That part was about to matter a great deal. The girl Mia was 5. Her mother had died 14 months earlier. The woman who normally watched her on evenings like this had called at noon with a fever and an apology. Levi had brought Mia along the same way he'd brought her to a dozen job sites before. Quietly, without complaint, with the quiet confidence of a man who had learned to solve problems using whatever resources were available. He had promised her it would be 1 hour. That had been 3 hours ago. Mia had her toy car. She was fine. Levi guided her to a folding chair near the wall far from the crowd, close enough to the door that leaving would be simple, and set her down with the small canvas bag. He told her to stay put, and he would be back in 10 minutes. She looked up at him with the patient, pragmatic expression of a child who had learned that 10 minutes could mean a lot of things, and said okay. He turned to find the finance contact. He took 3 steps, and then he saw the Bugatti. More precisely, he saw what was wrong with it, not the car itself. He had seen Chirons before, had worked on 2 of them during a 3-year stretch that felt like a different life. What he saw was the diagnostic indicator on the center display a specific sequence, a particular color, and the way the men around the car were positioned. He saw where their tools were. He saw what components had been opened and closed again. And he saw one thing that no one had touched. He stood still for a moment. Grace Aldrin looked up from her tablet. She noticed him looking at the car. She noticed the look itself, not curiosity, not idle interest, but the focused, quiet attention of someone processing information. She glanced at her tablet. She looked at the untouched category at the bottom of her list. She looked back at him. Neither of them spoke. Levi turned toward the wall, intending to find the hallway to the finance office. He had gotten exactly as far as 2 steps when he heard the voice. "Hey!" It was sharp, low, and close. He turned. Dominic Reese was standing 8 feet away, and the expression on his face had moved through 4 distinct stages in the span of about 3 seconds. Levi could see the progression clearly. He had seen it before, 3 years ago, across a conference table. It started with surprise, and ended somewhere that looked like controlled panic wearing the costume of disdain. "Who let you in here?" Dominic said. "Logistics clearance. Service entrance." Levi held up his badge without any particular urgency. "I'm here for payment confirmation on the vehicle transport contract. Finance hasn't. This is a closed event. You're a contract worker. You don't have floor access for the gala. I have access until 9. It's 8:42. Dominic turned and said something to the security officer near the corridor entrance. The officer, a large man in a dark jacket, started toward Levi with the unhurried efficiency of someone who did this often enough that it required no thought. Levi did not argue. He took one step back, raised both hands slightly, the universal language of a man who has no interest in a scene, and said, "I'll go. I just need the signature first. Get the signature tomorrow. Leave now." The security officer reached him. And here was the moment that changed the tenor of the rest of the evening. Mia stood up. She didn't cry. She didn't call out. She simply rose from the folding chair, walked to where her father was standing, and positioned herself beside him with the unhurried calm of a child who had learned that standing next to her father was always the right place to be. She held her toy car against her chest with both arms. She looked up at the security officer with wide brown eyes that contained not a single trace of fear. The security officer, to his credit, stopped. The room had a different texture now. A few guests near the edge of the display floor had turned. Werner Baumann had turned. Grace had risen from her chair. Eleanor Vance set down her empty glass. She hadn't been watching Dominic. She had been watching the Chiron. She was still watching it when her peripheral vision registered the sequence of events: the arrival of the gray-shirted man, Dominic's reaction, the child stepping forward. She processed each element with the precision of someone who had spent her adult life in rooms where the real conversations were never the ones being spoken aloud. Something in Dominic's reaction was wrong. Not the irritation, she understood the irritation. What was wrong was the speed of it, the certainty, the specific urgency of a man who needed a specific person out of a specific room. Levi turned, placed his hand on Mia's shoulder, and prepared to walk toward the corridor. He had decided, in the span of about 1 second, that the signature was not worth whatever this was becoming. Eleanor said, "What do you see?" 3 words. She said them to the middle distance, the way a person speaks when they are not sure they intend to be heard, but need to say the thing anyway. Levi stopped. He turned back. Eleanor was looking at the car, not at him. But the question had been directed at him. They both understood that. The entire room seemed to understand it. Dominic said, "Eleanor, this man is a contract mechanic. He has no engineering qualifications relevant to..." Eleanor raised one hand, barely moving it, the gesture of someone turning down a volume knob. Dominic went quiet. Levi looked at Eleanor. She looked at the car. Then, because there was no sensible reason not to, he answered her. "The secondary fuel rail has a vibration tolerance that runs narrow when the ambient temperature drops below roughly 56 degrees Fahrenheit," he said. His voice was level, unhurried, the voice of someone explaining a fact they have known for a long time to someone who has just asked about it. "Tonight is cold. The auxiliary pressure regulator is cycling out of phase with the primary injection sequence. The ECU isn't reading it as a hardware fault. It's reading it as a logic error. Nothing in the official service documentation covers that scenario, because the analysis that identified it was never formally approved." The room had gone very quiet. Not the strained, expectant quiet of a crowd watching something about to happen. A different kind of quiet, the specific silence of a room in which a large number of intelligent people have just understood something simultaneously. Grace looked at her tablet. At the bottom of her list, the untouched category, secondary fuel rail pressure cycle. She had written it there 2 hours ago because the pattern of the error code suggested it, but she hadn't had the experience to be sure. She looked up. Dominic said, "That theory has already been..." He stopped. Grace said, "It hasn't." Quietly. Not aggressively. Just accurately. "It's not on the list." Werner Baumann had not moved. He had been watching Levi Harmon with the focused attention of someone retrieving a memory that hasn't been needed in a while. He had the look of a man who recognized something. Mia, who had been standing at her father's side through all of this, took one long look at the Bugatti. Then she lifted her toy car to eye level and tilted her head, comparing the two vehicles. she said, very softly. Same color, but that one's bigger. No one laughed. But something in the room changed. Some thread of tension that had been pulled almost to the point of breaking loosened by a single degree. Eleanor looked at Levi. She said, "What do you need?" He thought for a moment. A 14-millimeter wrench. And 5 minutes, Dominic opened his mouth. Eleanor did not look at him. The security officer had already stepped back. Levi set the canvas bag down beside Mia's chair. He took the wrench that Grace retrieved from the technical kit at her station. He walked to the car, crouched beside the engine compartment, and he began. He did not perform. There was no theater in the way he worked, no dramatic pauses, no sweeping gestures designed to communicate competence. He simply knew where to look, and he looked there. His hands moved with the particular, unhurried certainty of someone who has done a specific thing so many times that thinking about it would only slow the process. Mia sat back down on her chair. She watched. She had watched her father work on cars in garages and driveways, and once in a parking structure during a rainstorm, and she had learned a long time ago that the way to help was to be very still and hold the car. The first minute, Levi placed his bare hand against the housing of the secondary fuel rail, not to test temperature, to feel resonance. He kept it there for about 20 seconds. His eyes focused at a middle distance that suggested he was processing something other than what he was looking at. Then he moved his hand along the rail toward the mounting bracket. The second minute, he removed 2 small fasteners from the bracket, nothing dramatic, ordinary removal, and shifted the angle of the rail by approximately 3 degrees. Someone in the crowd exhaled audibly. Someone else murmured something that was not quite skepticism and not quite hope. The third minute, he found the auxiliary pressure regulator, a component the size of a thick paperback book, tucked behind the intake manifold, where the access was difficult enough that most service approaches bypassed it. He did not use the diagnostic tablet. He reset the regulator manually, using a sequence of 3 specific adjustments that came not from a manual, but from a place in his hands that manuals could not reach. Grace was recording every movement on her tablet, not because she had been asked, because she understood that what she was watching was not standard procedure. It was something rarer than standard procedure. The fourth minute, Levi stood. He looked into the engine compartment one more time, made no additional changes, and lowered the hood with both hands. He stepped back from the vehicle. Dominic had not spoken in 4 minutes. He stood 7 meters away with his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at a point on the floor that contained nothing. The 5th minute. Levi looked at Eleanor. He nodded once. Eleanor walked to the driver's side door. She had not sat in this car in 6 months. She had bought it as a centerpiece for tonight, as a symbol of what the partnership she was about to formalize represented the highest possible expression of what her company could achieve. She opened the door and sat down. The seat adjusted automatically. The ambient lighting inside the cabin came on. She pressed the ignition. 1 second. The W16 engine started. It did not sputter. It did not cough, and reluctantly agreed to function. It came to life the way engines like this were designed, to a deep, even resonant rumble that moved through the floor of the pavilion and up through the souls of every person standing on it. The kind of sound that was less noise than presence. 3 seconds of absolute silence from the room. Then Werner Baumann smiled. It was a small smile, private, the expression of a man who has just seen something confirmed that he suspected was true. Mia raised her toy car toward the ceiling and said, "Vroom." Eleanor sat with the engine running for a moment. She felt the vibration through the seat. She felt the car doing what it was built to do. Then she turned it off, stepped out, and looked across the hood. She looked at Levi. Then she looked at Dominic. Her voice, when she spoke, was very quiet. The kind of quiet that has the same effect as a very loud noise. "Dominic," she said, "how long have you known about this?" Grace had already found the file. She had retrieved it 17 minutes ago, had retrieved it the moment Levi walked in, and she recognized his name from the metadata on a document she had read during her first week at the company. A document that had made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't fully articulate until this moment. She read aloud from the tablet, not dramatically, not with any particular inflection, simply reading a fact that deserved to be read. Internal vibration analysis, W16 fuel system, low-temperature ambient conditions, submitted to the R&D department in the spring of 2021. Author, Levi Harmon. The room processed this at different speeds. Werner Baumann looked at Dominic with an expression that was not surprise. Several engineers who had spent the last 4 hours kneeling around this car looked at each other and then looked at the floor. Levi stood where he had been standing. He did not look at the tablet. He did not look at Dominic. He was looking at Mia, who had gone back to arranging her toy car on the seat of the folding chair, with the focused attention of a child who has decided that the adult business is resolved and has moved on. Werner spoke. His English was precise, each word selected with the care of a man who had learned the language as an adult and never trusted himself to be imprecise in it. He said, "I read that analysis 3 years ago. It was forwarded to our team as part of a joint technical review." He paused. "The version I received had a different name on it. The version submitted to the board 6 months after Levi's original filing, authored by Dominic Rees, bearing Dominic's name, using the same theoretical framework, the same supporting calculations, the same conclusions, had been the document that informed the design specifications for this very vehicle's service protocols. The document that made Dominic Rees's reputation in this industry. The document that had appeared roughly 3 months before the performance review that ended Levi Harmon's employment at this company. Dominic did not respond. He was a man who had spent 20 years becoming very good at controlling rooms. He had a response for everything. He had always had a response for everything. But he was standing in a room where the car was running, where the file was open, where Werner Baumann was looking at him with the particular expression of a man who has already drawn his conclusions and is simply waiting for the meeting to end. Dominic had nothing. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Levi. "How long have you known this? That you were walking into this room, this company, this situation?" Levi considered the question. "Since I walked through the door, a beat. And you fixed the car anyway." He looked briefly in the direction of Mia, then back. The car needed to be fixed. That part wasn't complicated. Eleanor let that sit in the air for a moment. Then she said, "Stay." Levi looked at Mia. Mia was rotating her toy car in slow circles on the seat of the chair, making a quiet engine sound with her mouth. He looked back at Eleanor. "I'll stay," he said, "but I'd like to get Mia settled first." Eleanor looked at the little girl for the first time directly. Mia looked back at her with complete, uncomplicated equanimity. The CEO of Vance Apex Motorsport and the 5-year-old daughter of the man who had just saved her $47 million evening held each other's gaze for approximately 2 seconds. Then Mia looked back at her car. Eleanor said, "Of course." What followed was not a confrontation, because Eleanor Vance was not a person who conducted confrontations on event floors in front of 400 guests. What followed was quieter than that. Werner excused himself to make a phone call brief, in German, standing near the window with his back to the room. Grace quietly noted every entry in her documentation log, correcting every place where the authorship of tonight's solution had been ambiguously recorded. And Dominic Rees stood near the edge of the display floor, with his hands still in his pockets, watching the room reorient itself around a new understanding of how the evening had actually gone. Eleanor found Levi near the back corridor, where he had settled Mia on a bench with a soft pretzel from the catering station and a cup of apple juice. He was crouched at her eye level, talking to her about something that had nothing to do with any of this. When Eleanor approached, Mia looked up and said, with the frank sociability of a 5-year-old, "Your dress is pretty." Eleanor said, "Thank you. So are your shoes." Mia considered this fair and went back to her pretzel. Eleanor sat in the chair adjacent to the bench. She said, "I owe you an apology, on behalf of this company." Levi said nothing. "I also owe you compensation, significantly more than your contract rate for tonight. There are also damages to consider, given what we now know about what happened 3 years ago. I'd like to—" "No." He said it without hardness, without the performative pride of a man determined to refuse on principle. He said it the way a person says no to a thing that was never going to be the right answer. "You don't owe me money for tonight, and you can't pay for 3 years with a check." Eleanor looked at him for a moment. "Then what do you want?" He looked at Mia. The little girl was tracing the outline of her toy car with one finger, following the curve of the hood, the slope of the roof. The same lines as the car sitting 50 feet away in the Grand Pavilion, rendered in die-cast metal, small enough to fit in a 5-year-old's hands. "The document," he said. "I want the name on that document corrected in the official record, not for me, for what it actually is. A piece of engineering work that was done by someone who isn't getting credit for it. That's all." Werner Baumann had appeared at the entrance to the corridor without being noticed. He stood there for a moment, listening. Then he said, "I think the contract we're signing tonight should include a clause on internal document provenance review, a formal audit of technical authorship over the past 5 years." He looked at Eleanor. "Our consortium has been recommending it for some time. Perhaps this is the right moment." Eleanor looked at Werner. Then she looked at Levi. Then she looked at Grace, who had appeared behind Werner with her tablet, and the expression of someone who has been waiting to say something useful for quite a while. Grace said, "I've already flagged the complete documentation chain. If we begin the correction process tomorrow, the formal record can be updated within a week." Levi stood up from his crouch beside Mia's bench. He reached down and adjusted the tie of Mia's ponytail. It had been sliding sideways for the better part of an hour. The little girl allowed this with the patient tolerance of someone who has learned to accept hair maintenance as an unavoidable aspect of having a father. Eleanor stood as well. She said, "I have one more question." He waited. "Are you still taking contract work?" The question landed differently than he expected. He had anticipated an offer, some version of a redemption arc, delivered in corporate language, a title, a salary range, a formal acknowledgement of the wrong that had been done. He had prepared, in some quiet recess of himself, to politely decline whatever it was. He had been declining things for 3 years. He was practiced at it. This was a different kind of question. It was not offering him anything. It was asking what he was. "For now," he said, "I'd like to schedule a meeting, Monday morning. If you're available." He looked at Mia. She had finished the pretzel and was holding her toy car up toward the corridor's overhead light, watching the way the light moved across the blue surface. The same look on her face she got whenever she found something worth understanding. "I'm available," he said. "But I have one condition. Namit, the document, first. The correction gets filed before I walk into any meeting. That's not a negotiation point." Eleanor held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "It will be done by Friday." Levi nodded once. They did not shake hands. They looked at each other in the way that two people look at each other when they have just established the terms of something real. Mia lowered her toy car and looked at Eleanor. She said, "Is your car going to be okay now?" Eleanor said, "Yes. Your father made sure of it." Mia nodded, entirely satisfied with this answer, and went back to the light. He told her on a Sunday morning. The kitchen was small, 2 windows, yellow curtains, a table with one leg that sat slightly lower than the other 3, which they had both stopped noticing 6 months ago. Levi was at the stove, scrambled eggs, the way Mia liked them, with the small cubes of cheddar that had to be folded in at the very end or they got too melted. Mia was on the tall stool at the counter, hair loose, still in pajamas, her toy car parked beside her glass of orange juice, like a tiny blue attendant. "Mia," he said. He didn't look away from the eggs. "I'm thinking about changing jobs." She looked up from whatever she had been examining on the tabletop. "What's changing?" "It means I'd go somewhere different to work. A bigger place." He paused. "I'd be busier sometimes. Would you still pick me up?" "Every day." She thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. Mia did not make quick decisions about things that mattered. She had gotten this from him, or he had gotten it from her after 5 years. He was no longer sure which direction the inheritance ran. "Does the place have cars?" "A lot of them." "Nitsa cars?" "The nicest kind." She looked at her toy car. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the voice she used when she was asking something she had been turning over for a while, "Nicer than Mama's car?" Levi moved the pan off the heat. He turned around and leaned against the counter and looked at his daughter. The morning light was coming through the yellow curtains, and it was making her hair look like something he didn't have a word for. "Nothing is nicer than Mama's car," he said. "You know that." Mia absorbed this. Her expression shifted through several small variations, the way her face always moved when she was deciding what she thought about a thing, and then settled into something resolved and clear. "Okay," she said. "Then you should go. But you have to take me sometimes." He slid the eggs onto a plate. He put the plate in front of her, He watched her arrange her fork and her toy car on either side of the plate with the spatial precision of a child who has very specific ideas about how her table should be organized. Then he picked up his phone. He typed a message to Grace Aldrin. Monday, 9 in the morning. I'll be there. He looked at the message for a moment before sending it. Then he typed one more line. The document correction needs to be in the formal record before the meeting. That is the condition. He sent it and put the phone face down on the counter. Mia was eating her eggs. She had positioned her toy car so it faced the window, its small wheels at the very edge of the countertop, the blue paint catching the morning light. The same color as the Chiron that had been sitting dead in a grand pavilion 48 hours ago. The same color as the car Mia's mother had driven, a second-hand two-door with a cracked dashboard and a passenger seat that had been covered in crayon drawings by the time it reached the end of its life. He looked at his daughter eating breakfast and he thought, some things cannot be taken. Not really. They can be moved around. They can be buried under wrong names and bad decisions and years of early mornings and small kitchens. But they stay where they are underneath all of it, patient, waiting to be called on. Monday morning, the building on Fifth Avenue where Vance Apex Motorsport occupied 4 floors was the kind of place that made people walk differently when they entered it. The lobby had 20-foot ceilings and a floor that reflected the light in ways that felt intentional. Levi wore a light green button-down shirt, dark trousers, and clean leather shoes. He had left Mia at the preschool down the street from their apartment, and she had gone without complaint, which meant she was in a good mood, which meant the day had started correctly. Grace met him at the elevator. She looked like she had been awake since before 6. She looked like she was happy about it. The filing went through Friday afternoon, she said, as they rose. The document has been corrected in the company record. The consortium received notification this morning. Werner's team? His office confirmed receipt. He asked me to tell you. She glanced at her tablet, and I'm quoting directly, "The right work has the right name now. That is how it should have been." Levi nodded. Grace said, "Dominic submitted his resignation Saturday morning. I don't know if anyone has told you. No one told me. It was quiet. No statement. No announcement. HR sent a company-wide email that said the Director of Engineering role was being restructured." She paused, which is accurate. He looked at the elevator doors. "Are you all right?" Grace asked. He thought about it the way he thought about everything, actually. Specifically, without rushing to a comfortable answer. "I'm fine," he said. "Some things take the time they take." The meeting room had floor-to-ceiling windows facing west and a table long enough that the far end existed in a different light than the near end. Eleanor was already there when he arrived. She was standing, not sitting standing at the window, looking at the city the way people look at things they are responsible for. She turned when she heard him enter. On the table, in the center, lay 2 documents. One was a single page, the corrected filing, bearing his name and the date of the original submission in 2021. The other was a contract, considerably longer, with a title at the top that he read once and then looked away from, because reading it a second time felt too much like wanting something. Eleanor said, "I can't give you back 3 years. I know. I can give you what comes after them." She indicated the chair across from her. "Read the contract. Take whatever time you need." He sat down. He picked up the single-page document first, the corrected filing. He looked at his name at the top of it. Levi Harmon, author, submitted spring 2021. The document that had started as a solution to a problem no one else had thought to look for, had been stolen, had been buried, and had now been returned to the place it began. He set it back down carefully. Then he read the contract. He read it the way he did everything all the way through, without skimming, attending to what the words actually said rather than what he hoped they said. He asked 2 questions. Eleanor answered them directly. He asked a third. She answered that one too. Then he signed it. Not the corrected document, he had not been asked to sign that. That one was already filed. That one required nothing from him except to exist, which it was now doing, correctly, with his name in the right place. He signed the contract, set the pen down, and looked at Eleanor across the long table. She said, "Welcome back." He said, "I was never here before." She considered that. Welcome then, for the first time. He thought about Mia in the preschool around the corner from their apartment, holding her toy car through circle time, through snack, through whatever the day had in store. He thought about the way she had asked whether he would still pick her up every day, and the way the question had contained everything that actually mattered, compressed into 9 words. He thought about a car that had been built to go 300 miles an hour, sitting silent and dead in a room full of people who were very smart, but had not known where to look. He thought about a document with the wrong name on it, filed in a drawer for 3 years, waiting. Some things wait. That was what he had learned, the thing that had made the 3 years bearable, that had made the early mornings and the small kitchens and the contract work and the hand-holding through preschool drop-offs into something other than loss. Some things wait, and they do not become less true while they are waiting. They just wait. He picked up the corrected document. He folded it carefully along the center. He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, close, where he would feel it when he moved. Then he looked at Eleanor and said, "I'll need the full technical files from the 2021 audit period, and I'd like to start Tuesday." She said, "Tuesday is fine." He stood up. He shook her hand. He walked back through the building with its high ceilings and its reflecting floors, through the lobby and out through the glass doors and into the ordinary bright morning of the city. Mia was at the preschool window when he arrived that afternoon. She saw him through the glass before he came through the door. She always did. Had always been the first to spot him, a fact that never stopped meaning something. She came through the door already talking. "Did you go to the new place?" "I did." "Did you sign the thing?" "I did." "Are there cars?" "More than you can count." She thought about this. Then, what color? He remembered the Chiron, the agave blue, the way it had caught the chandelier light, the way Mia had held up her toy car and compared them in the middle of a room full of people who had given up. He looked down at his daughter. "Same color as yours," he said. She looked at the toy car in her hand. She looked at him. She smiled the way she smiled when something was exactly what it was supposed to be. Levi Harmon put his hand on his daughter's shoulder, and they walked home together through the afternoon. The toy car tucked in her jacket pocket, the corrected document folded against his chest, the city carrying on around them, the way cities do, indifferent to most things. But moving, always moving, full of engines that someone somewhere knows how to start.